Thank you, everybody. I think you all get awards for attending this after lunch on a Tuesday afternoon, so I think that's a great start for circular economy. And I've got one circular economy advocate here, so I'm quite excited about that, albeit a bit daunting. But my presentation is on what we call environmental economics and when zero counts. And obviously we hear about supply chains and everybody understands supply chains, all of us sitting here working in a collaborative format. But I want to hopefully by the end of this session give you some ideas about really why zero counts and why we talk about zero. And what does this zero mean? Is it zero waste? Is it zero to landfill? Is it zero impact of costs? Is it zero impact from an environmental perspective? What do we mean by zero? And what can we do differently in our businesses? So if anything, I know that you guys have had lunch, and please I ask you to sit back and relax. This is a big hall with, it's a bit daunting, but we'll get through it. And I hope if there's something you can get away from this is understand that all of us are in a position to influence our businesses every day, specifically around this topic. It doesn't matter where you sit, you really have an impact of influence. So, in fact, my circular economy, should I say, soulmate sitting here today, we spoke about Ellen MacArthur. So Ellen MacArthur, on the 7th of February 2005, broke the world record for solo circumnavigation. She was 28 at the time, and I think for those of you at the Supply Chain Foresight presentation yesterday, Kate also spoke about guys who go on voyages that are really, really tough. But this guy yesterday in Kate's presentation had a team of people. Ellen MacArthur was on her own. So this is the vessel she was on, this boat she was on. It was 71 days and 14 hours, and it went on an average speed about 30 plus knots. So for those of us, and I'm one of them, I'm not one of the people that will get on a boat, but it's around 60 kilometers an hour. And if we think that that's probably not that big a deal, we all get in our cars, we drive on the highways, I think if you understand that you're on your own, facing the elements at that speed, it's quite a daunting thing. So, and specifically Ellen MacArthur refers to a place called Point Nemo, which is in the southern oceans. It's a particular area that's linked, it's the closest points between New Zealand and an area called Cape Horn. And at that stage, the closest people to her at that point were people located on the International Space Station. So you can imagine you're sitting in this vessel that's supposed to keep you alive. There's these huge waves crashing on you, and you'll all get to the point where you'll understand why this is quite topical and what we're trying to talk about. But she gives us a description of what it was like. She says, we all know what it's like driving at 60 kilometers an hour. It's not too stressful, we can concentrate, we can turn on the radio. If we're on South African roads, probably catch up on a couple of emails, a couple of texts. I see those happening all the time. Maybe the taxis can come speeding to the left or right, so I'm sort of putting in some paragraphs there. And then she says, take your speed up to 160 to 180 kilometers an hour. And now you're gripping that steering wheel, depending on the quality of your car. So again, if you're on the South African roads and it's an old car, you're probably doing more than gripping onto that steering wheel. If you're in a more modern car, maybe that's quite easy for you to do. And then she says, well, take that environment and take that car at that speed, take it off the road. So it doesn't matter whether you're driving a fancy car or not a fancy car. Drive it at night, drive it in the pouring rain, remove the windscreen wipers, remove the windscreen, take the headlights away and the brakes. And that's what it's like on a yacht in the Southern Ocean, and in particular, the Point Nemo. And you'll understand why this point is so emotional and why it becomes such a big deal as we go through the presentation. So there's many people who actually do these other solo circumnavigations. I know of the guy that went for a swim in the North Pole, and they all try and raise awareness around environmental issues. There's lots of guys, there's guys that go for a cycle, or they'll go for several marathons, or they'll really try and build some kind of awareness around environmental issues. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, you know, that guy's a bunny hugger, and they're really trying to do it to kind of keep everybody happy and make you feel at peace. But there was something different about Ellen MacArthur. What made it different was she said, your boat is your entire world, and what you take with you when you leave is all you have. You have to manage everything down to the last drop of diesel and the last bit of packed food. No experience in my life could have given me a better understanding of the definition of the word finite. What we have out there is all we have, and no more. So for the first time, and again I'm going to refer to the supply chain foresight presentation Kate did yesterday as well, these guys were going to the South Pole. They also did a track. They were on this vessel, and all they had was the food that they had at the time. And okay, once they landed, they could hunt. But while they were on the water, that's all they had. And I'm going to get to the emotional Greenpeace bit now, because this is all we have. This planet is literally all we have. We are on it. We are on this boat. We are all going, and whether we all think we collaborate, we all wake up in the morning. You wake up with yourself. You wake up with yourself sitting in this vessel that is all you have. So now I hope the zero waste starts kicking in. So it was only after I stepped off the boat and reflected on the journey that I connected the dots. Our global economy is no different. It is entirely dependent on finite materials we only have once in the history of humanity. And I do know that there are guys that are planting renewable resources, but at the same time, we have finite resources. And I'm speaking, so I'm lucky enough, I live on the East Coast, I live in Durban, actually Ballito. And one of the realizations you come to understand when people say finite resources is we've experienced the drought. Our dams were as low as 17%, and we went through a phase, and it's still around us, but there was literally no water. You opened up a tap, and there was nothing coming out of it. The guys living in the rural communities, we had to have water collections for them, take bottled water so they could actually have water when they went home. So it's quite easy to think, well, you know, we've got finite resources, but we all get in our cars, go to the shop, get your shopping trolley, and start filling those things up. But imagine the impact of having something as simple as no water. And you can imagine that if you're on the ocean, you're surrounded by salt water. There's no fresh water on your boat. What do? So is there a way to change the consumption pattern of the world? So we're sitting in a linear economy, and it is changing, so that's the good story. So I'm not here to depress anybody, and you know, but we really do consume. So we take the material out of the ground, we manufacture, we create a product, and we ultimately throw it away. And we do attempt to recycle some of it. So just in context for all of you, we've all been at a great conference. I think some of you have been here since Sunday. I arrived yesterday. So I'd just like to ask a question, which you don't have to answer publicly, but how many of you can remember how much food you threw away on your plate this morning? Or over lunch? Can you remember? And when you had drinks last night, how many glasses were left with drinks still in your glass? And how many ordered a bottle of wine and maybe finished half, and the guys took the rest away, and you actually don't know what happened to the rest? And some of you might have woken up this morning not feeling so great, looking for that bottle of water that you drank somewhere in the night, and then threw all the stuff in the bin in your hotel room. And it's kind of, you understand that there's all these resources because you can go to this buffet table that's in front of you, dish up your food, and leave a half a plate behind. And so the concept of circular economy is we don't leave a half a plate behind. So I think, and if, again, I say, out of this entire presentation, for all of us, if there's something that I would like you to take away, is that you do have such a big impact on how we behave and how we utilize resources. And I would also like to say, and when I talk about this circular economy in more detail, I'd also like to say that there's nothing wrong with waste, but it is what you do with it that counts. Now you start understanding why we say zero when zero counts. So we then start talking about the circular economy. So I have my friend over there who's vouching for circular economy, and I'd like to describe it to you in a very, very simple concept. So I don't know who's been to the Pilansberg in the bush just behind us here. It's beautiful. It's absolutely incredible. So if you have to look at nature, and you say, for example, look at a tree. The tree starts growing, it bears fruit. The monkeys come along, the monkeys have a bite of the fruit, they throw the fruit down. They've wasted the fruit, they've not eaten the entire thing. They've had the fruit, they've taken a bite out of it, they've thrown the fruit down. The lions come along, the lions attack the monkey, the lion has his lunch, doesn't eat the entire monkey, but leaves bits of it behind. So again, there's waste. Then the hyenas come and they'll clean up, there'll be some vultures around, and there'll still be waste. And eventually that body and the bones start disintegrating, the calcium goes back in the ground. The fruit, by the way, has also started disintegrating with insects all around it. And so all of this goes back into the soil, the tree grows again, and so the whole process starts all over. So the concept of circular economy is one of, it's fine to waste. In other words, we all have processes naturally that occur that have waste. But it is what happens to that resource that gets broken down and reused that goes back in that cycle, that makes another life come to life again. And I think, I'm quite sure for those of you who've taken a game drive, it's not like the lions go, oh damn it, we've wasted half this monkey, let's go and put it in a bin over there, you know? Let's wait for the waste compactor to come around and get half the monkey, half a warthog, and off it goes and puts it in a pile. It's quite an unnatural thing as far as waste management is concerned. In fact, I think the bush has got great waste management. Between the hyenas and the vultures, they're the cleanup crew. But really in context for us, and specifically our business works from an environmental and sustainability perspective, is there's nothing wrong with waste. But it is how we use that waste, that drive it to zero, that makes it a resource for somebody else to utilize to start that process again. So then we get back to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and she started something called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and specifically around circular economy. And for those of you who haven't heard of it, I urge you to go and have a look at her website. It's an incredible website. And a whole group of companies have all come around. They're all part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And they are multinationals, and you'll recognize all the brands as you see them. And if you work in the waste hierarchy, there's a typical waste hierarchy that says reduce, reuse, recycle, and then at the last bit of the triangle is dispose. So what we're saying is, let's try and reduce waste, let's reuse it, let's recycle it, and let's sit with this last bit that we'll take away. And Ellen MacArthur and her team came up with something called rethink and redesign, right at the top of the hierarchy. Because if we can create how we operate, and that includes supply chains, by the way, because we all know supply chains have got a lot of waste in them. By waste of time, waste of stock, waste of routing, waste of planning, waste of inaccurate forecasting. Those are all wastes that get generated. So when I talk about waste, I do mean manufacturing waste. I talk about our waste, all the things that we leave that are residuals. But in a supply chain process, there's waste that is similar to any other process that exists. So these guys get together and they have the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. There's a lot of white papers that are around, and you can actually go and have a read. And specifically on the FMCG industry, they're quite strong about understanding what do we do with all these various waste resources. And how do we rethink, redesign, remap the way that we do things to actually add value to this one beautiful earth that we sit on. So now we're in the circular economy environment. I think this is where the meaty supply chain, and please, I'm not a supply chain expert, I'm here from an environmental perspective, but we do work with several businesses either in warehousing, retail, distribution themselves, manufacturing, and we start looking at that farm to fork process. And we know that we've got a manufacturing environment, we know that we've got a DC environment, we've got primal distribution, secondary distribution, all the way to the customer. And then we look at this whole reuse, renew aspect that we're talking about. And we take a step back and we say, well, how can we take this entire supply chain with the circular economy that sits around it? And by the way, the circular economy doesn't just refer to our own economies, in other words, in your own industrial sector, but refers to all circular economies that exist across all sectors. And how do we drive this goal of zero waste? And specifically, I mean zero waste to landfill, not necessarily zero waste, because as I said to you before, waste is ultimately a resource. And it might not be a valuable resource in your hands, but maybe with some processes, it will become a valuable resource in somebody else's hands. And then we look and you'll see that we've actually created a circle around, from a circular economy perspective, around the production, the waste environment, the DC and the customer. Because I know a lot of retailers have been doing work on reversing back some of the product that they can't sell. They take it back all the way to the manufacturers to be reworked, to go back to DC. And if something goes wrong with the cold storage, that creates a problem. If something goes wrong with the packaging, that creates a problem. Something goes wrong with a recipe. I don't know if all of you remember, a couple of years ago, there was a specific dye that happened, and all of a sudden, all these products had to be recalled. And in every single instance, it generates waste. And so what we like to do in our business is we say, well, if waste occurs in every single part of the supply chain, how about getting everybody to actually sit around the table and work together? And I'll go into that in my presentation a little bit further to help you understand. Just to give you some context, globally, there's 11 billion tons of waste. It's worth in excess of $1 trillion. That's what the waste industry is worth. In South Africa, 25.2 billion rand. And 90% of our products are sent to landfill. And you'll say to me, but Marilize, we've got recycling stations out here. We all have recycling stations at our offices. My kids have got recycling stations at their school. It's an absolute drop in the ocean. I don't know how many of you, and specifically I know in Joburg, you can see the landfills are rising. Landfill airspace is becoming quite a big commodity because there's some materials that are just being taken away to waste. Inefficiencies in municipalities. We all know of the pick-it-up strikes, for example, in Joburg. The moment you start having contamination in waste, there's no option but to send it to landfill unless you say potentially you want to incinerate it. But really it's a problem because it's a habit. It's like leaving plates on your food on your plate. Because there's no consciousness around it. There's nobody's saying, well, let me take ownership of this and actually drive this, because I will not leave food on my plate. I want to know where that food's going. And again, it comes to us taking action from a business perspective, taking that first step to understand what does sustainability really look like, and what does that supply chain really look like. So now we start looking at the closed loop, and I've spoken to you guys, you all understand, I think, and I hope, what a circular economy is. And again, I'll refer you back to the vultures and the hyenas if you get lost a little bit. And in this instance, this graphic that you see here is one that we all know. I think all of us know, for example, that glass bottles in this country, and specifically the glass recycling process, is well recycled. Something like glass is well recycled, albeit there's quite a process involved, but glass recycling is something that's quite common. I think we all know glass recycling bins have been around for a long time. So this is an image to describe that the glass is going back in the loop. They use it instead of using raw materials like lime and silica, they can actually reuse the glass. But what are the benefits to this economy? Because I know that in business, at the end of the day, the shareholder wants their bit, the consumer wants to pay less, everybody in between gets squeezed, and the moment that if they starting getting pressure, you start losing focus on some of the other things that could potentially add value and get back to your key elements that drive that shareholder value. So financial benefits are at the top of this list, you'll see them there, but sometimes, unfortunately, the financial benefit might not sit under your direct area of control. It might sit somewhere else. I'll give you an example. You sit in a process, a supply chain process, there's waste at the end of the process, and in this instance, the packaging, for example, is not recyclable. So when the SHEC person, which is normally where waste sits, signs off the bill for waste, and maybe the financial manager, there's no thought to potentially changing the packaging so that my waste disposal bill could be less. But if you understand how that gap starts to be closed, and you can maybe understand that if you create something that's more recyclable, you can then get your material back from the consumer, we can drive it in a way that you can track it and ultimately recycle it again, you start creating value, maybe not for yourself, but maybe in the bigger procurement supply chain. So that the benefit might not sit in your direct income statement, but maybe from a procurement perspective, it could sit there. Information and reporting. We've now entered into an era where there's something called the Carbon Disclosure Program, CDP. Many of the international businesses are, and I know a lot of South African businesses are part of the CDP. And I urge for those of you who are in businesses where your business actually submits a CDP to go and read it. It's very interesting material. And I know I'm an environmental person, so I do read it, but please do yourself a favor. There's many interesting things there that affect business strategy. But one of the things that's now going to come into the CDP report to be classified as an A, category A business as far as CDP, in other words, the highest ranking performing business, is to start measuring your scope 3 carbon emissions, which is an indirect emission. In other words, if you own a supply chain, you're a distributor or a manufacturer, and you've now contracted somebody else to do your supply chain, that wouldn't have counted under your scope 1 emission. In other words, a direct emission. It would have been a scope 3 emission. Similarly, for those of us who work in waste management, it wouldn't have formed part if it was outsourced of the client's emission. It would be ours, but it would be a scope 3 emission. CDP now says you will go and account for your scope 3 emission. and you will understand the impact because it is as a result of your operating business. Increased competitiveness, we've all seen it, and I think specifically in the younger generations, the moment that there's something that says organic on a label, fair trade, there's something in there that says we use less carbon, our carbon footprint's reduced, there's a natural move of somebody to start getting a brand awareness and brand sort of really just being able to be more competitive in the market. Brand protection, this is something we come across as a business. So once again, someone sits there, they're doing their accounts, and they say, okay, well, we've got this waste. The best thing is let's sell it off to somebody. Someone will buy this. But with no understanding of where that brand's going. So let's give you an example. So you're a food manufacturer, and you've got this leftover food, and you think, well, the best place to take it is there's a farmer over there, and pigs eat everything, so the pigs can take it. Do you know whether your packaging is involved in the process or not? Do you actually understand whether that animal farm is sustainable or not? How do they treat the animals? How does the soil get treated? What happens to those animals? Are they tracked on their diets, on their eating behavior? Does it have any context that maybe not in your supply chain, but maybe in the food that you're having for breakfast, that potentially that animal's having the wrong diet? Material and energy recovery, we're doing a lot of work at the moment where we're looking at various types of energy recovery of various types of waste, and it's a very real thing. We've got some legislative issues which we're working on, but it is well worth it to understand your waste streams to see what can be done, and maybe not on your own, but at a collaborative level to try and look at energy recovery. And there's a lot of technologies. There's technologies called anaerobic digestion, which is in essence like your stomach. It digests the food that you eat, and you can create energy out of it. It creates gas, it creates electricity, and you can utilize that. Ecological benefits. We all know that obviously if there's less waste to landfill and you use more resources, something that's very real, and again I'll refer to food waste because food is ultimately carbon. If you can get that back into the soil, we're enriching something that's really very poor in South Africa. Boosting supplier relationships. We've done some supplier audits where we've actually said to them, what are your supplier sustainability standards? How do you know that that supplier will still be around in a year's time, in 5 years' time? What are their strategies from a sustainability perspective? Are they procuring differently? How do they treat their employees? What is their logistics? What does their supply chain look like? Health and social, I think we all want to know that we all want to be in an environment that's healthy. I think we've all been in heavy industrial areas where you can see this nice cloud, dense cloud hanging over the industry. We all see stuff spewing out of some of these towers, and specifically these huge metal incinerators. Eskom, we all know, is a big polluter for us, but we use that electricity because we need it. It's so easy to put the switch on. How do we think about it differently? Boosting customer long-term loyalty and strengthening company identity, I referred to it before. I know that, for example, there was a tacky manufacturer a couple of years ago that came out with the first environmental standard on their shoe. They actually made an environmental measurement and declaration on what went into that shoe. I was told earlier today that there was another brand that's now made a shoe completely out of plastics that have been recovered out of the ocean. And I mean, I think from a brand awareness perspective, if it's a brand you like, if you've got two brands you like, but you know the one's got a better environmental impact, I think most of us would go for the one that we understand is better. So then we start looking at zero waste to landfill. And one of the things that we do as a business, but certainly is something in all of our environments, is waste minimization and beneficiation technologies. And it's a very fancy word, meaning you work with the waste that you have and you try and recover as much out of it as possible. Waste management predominantly implemented as a separate leg in the supply chain. So you've got the guys that look at the supply chain, they put procurement, they put warehousing, they put their transport and distribution all in a leg. But the waste side will typically sit either with a SHEC person or a risk person or the financial person. And so those decisions never, ever, ever come together. So if someone had to look at the real cost of procurement and manufacturing, taking into account the cost of waste, I think the answer sometimes would be very different. Do you look at your waste as part of your stock control? Do you understand that maybe if you've bought 100% of your procurement stock, is 90% of it manufacturing result and 10% of it waste? Do you actually have that information to overlook your entire supply chain? Reverse logistics, and there's many operators who do it nowadays, it typically focuses on the return of surplus. So in other words, we're distributing to our retailer, there's a swell allowance, and we bring some of that back and we try and recoup of it as much as possible. But do we actually, again, look at that entire farm to fork supply chain? And what does that look like? And can we maybe collaborate? And are there different ways to do that? How do we hook in various supply chains to try and do this together? So we say, look at it from a systems approach perspective. Everything from the farm to the manufacturing entities, to the way it gets moved, to the retailer, to the final end of waste. And look at the energy consumption that's used across the chain. Look at the carbon emission impact that sits across the chain. And yes, it might seem daunting and complicated, and like all things in life, my answer to you would be bite-sized chunks. But you certainly have to start somewhere. You certainly have to start in your own area of control and start mapping these areas together. So for us, we say, and if I can give you a little bit of advice, and I think this is as simple as it's going to get, and it really can be this simple, the first answer would be to create a baseline. And you might say to me, well, Marilize, but we've got Excel spreadsheets. We have our systems. We know what our waste is. I can promise you, if you take those spreadsheets and you go and take a walk around and ask the manufacturing guys on the floor, or ask the DC guy, and you say to them, is this what comes out of your process? Your answer will probably be, not always, but your answer will often be, no, but we've actually got more than this. Or we have this, but some of the stuff actually leaves through this door. Or, but no, but we've got a special contract with this guy. And it might not be as comprehensive as you think. So take the time to ask the question to actually understand what comes out of your various processes. Understand the client's goals, understand your strategy, understand what's in your carbon disclosure reports. So we often have a fun time because you'd walk into a business and you read everybody, and I think most of us in the room, environmental goal, and it's there. It looks quite nice. And then you have a CDP report, and again, it's quite nice. Go into the manufacturing area or the DC area, and you ask the guys who are actually working in the manufacturing zones and the sweeper and the cleaner, and ask them if they understand the strategy. And you can ask them, do you understand where you need to put this? Because that is what relates back to where we want to be as a business. And there's often a disconnect. And that's the area, that is the part where we like to get involved and play in, because that is the most opportunity. To sit in a boardroom and have a strategic discussion is great and is necessary. But the answer is not in the boardroom. The answer is in how your business actually sits and builds together. Build a project plan. So it's always a great thing. You obviously understand who's responsible, who's accountable, who's driving, and the change management and all those elements come to play. But here comes the next best thing. So again, all of us have sat in workshop sessions like this today. You would have had lots of workshops. And you have a strategy and you understand it and the plan goes out. We've had many of them. But it's the communication and feedback that's critical. Is it working? Can you see a result? What is the answer? And that is what really starts driving the behavior. And then assess and align. We've often been involved in manufacturing areas where you think you're going in a way. Marketing decides they're going to change the brand, and with the brand change comes new packaging, and it destroys all the work that's been done because none of the stuff's being tied together. But if everybody gets and sits around the table, it's often a different answer. And so the baseline gets recreated. You understand what the new numbers are, and the whole cycle takes again. And then, without you even realizing it, you're driving zero waste, because now the whole thing starts fitting together. Information flow and reporting, I've spoken about measurements and baselining, but really this is extremely critical. I often say to my guys, well, if you're going from Durban to Pietermaritzburg, how do you know when you're in Maritzburg? So if you don't have a sign and you don't have the proper analysis to tell you where you are, how do you know whether you're worse or better? So information flow, we all know. What gets analyzed gets done, what gets measured gets done, and I think it's key. If the business actually understands the true measurements, the ones that have impact, not just ones that are a strategic goal, but the ones that have impact, those are always the ones that have the right answer. And then we've spoken about reverse logistics before, but looking at centralized logistics facilities and waste beneficiation plants, and this could mean anything if you're in the food waste or if you're in the food industry, understanding how the packaging can be removed from your food waste and moved into the right areas, and the right sustainable areas. It could mean from a glass, if there's e-waste, I know all of us have got cell phones and laptops and all these things. There's many elements, but it might not just sit in your supply chain. It might have to be a collaboration to actually make it worthwhile. So reduction of waste generated by complex or segregated supply chains, as I've just said. Economies of scale, because sometimes people have tried to go at it alone. And it simply does not work. I was having a discussion with somebody outside earlier, and they said, well, we've got this product, and we actually don't know what to do with it. And I said to them, but understand that the downstream user of that resource needs exactly the same thing that you do. You want to know it's on time, you want to know that it's consistent, you want to know that you can plan. So if you have this ad hoc relationship coming out of your waste environment, it's very difficult for the guy who's going to use the material to use it. Because whatever applies to you certainly applies to the person who's using it downstream. So that collaboration and working together and getting the mass is very important. Timeous processing of perishable foodstuffs. So never mind the fact that it's actually just good practice from a HACCP perspective. There's a Waste Act impact as well, and sometimes just something as simple as smell can become a huge thing. Co-processing, so increasing value and finding synergies. So sometimes we'll co-process one element with another element to give you the right answer. Reduction of carbon footprint, we've spoken about that before. Avoiding unnecessary transport, maybe in your own supply chain, it would be unnecessary transport, but together you can map two supply chains together. Optimization, and then central reporting for ecological impact. We all have to actually start understanding properly what our greenhouse gas impact really is. I'm not going to bore you with this detail because I know it's getting late in the afternoon, but there is something called the National Environmental Management Waste Act. In our country, it talks about the protection of health and the environment, minimization potential for pollution. It does really talk about reduce, reuse, recycle. Concept of ecological sustainable development and integrated waste management. There's something called the integrated waste management plan. Provision of waste management licenses. So there's certain thresholds in businesses where they start talking about getting a waste management license if you hit the threshold. And provide for remediation and enforcement measures. Even something, and it's actually not simple, something is ground contamination. So some of the heavy industries might have oil or some of the pollutants that have actually seeped into the ground. It's now got a serious impact. If you one day have to sell that property, there's got to be remediation processes in place. You have to start providing for some of these things financially on your balance sheet. But I suppose at the end of the day, it's all about due care. It's all about being responsible. And then from a competitive advantage perspective, through collaboration to remove waste across the total supply chain, and I do mean total, farm to fork, we have managed to divert waste from landfill down to 1%, and we're working on that 1%. And it's actually some procurement strategies that have to change that'll probably get them to zero in the next couple of months. So all I'm trying to tell you is it's not doom and gloom. It really is possible, but you have to take the time to understand the data, the processes, the environment, and what's important to your business to make the right decisions. So from an economic perspective, recapture value from raw materials. It's critical. It speaks to supply chain, but it also speaks to circular economy, because that's what we want to do. We want to be efficient at recycling. We all want to decrease waste costs. If I had to ask any of you, and everybody feels it's a grudge purchase, it's not any money you want to spend it on. It's the first thing you probably want to cut in your budget, and probably the easiest one to put pressure on. And there's also this pressure on the consumer. The consumer's got less to spend. So what other process do we have than to try and add value in our own supply chain to ultimately bring that pricing down, or at least keep it level? I'd just like to finish off, and I'm almost done, so I just thought I would lighten all of you up by a little video towards the end. You didn't have to listen to me droning on and on, because I can. But by 2050, we would have more plastic in the sea than fish. So someone asked me earlier when they spoke about the shoe manufacturers using all the plastic, he said, but is it sustainable? With our current behavior, it's actually sustainable for a manufacturer to go and harvest plastic out of the ocean to manufacture another product. But there's some good news, and I'm going to give you a video here, which I think, so the beginning of it is sad. I'm an animal person, but when you see the end, you'll see what's possible just by thinking out of the box just a little.
Americans drank 6.3 billion gallons of beer last year, 50% in cans. Most of the plastic six-pack rings used end up in the ocean.
Around the world, an estimated 1 million seabirds and 100,000 marine mammals and sea turtles become entrapped in plastic or ingested and die.
People think that cutting the rings is enough, but birds and turtles eat the plastic either way.
That's why we decided to do something to protect marine life and also connect with our primary target, surfers, fishermen, and people who love the sea. Saltwater Brewery presents edible six-pack rings. A six-pack ring that feeds animals instead of killing them. We developed a material made of barley and wheat remnants from the brewing process that replaces plastic and also is edible for sea animals.
Besides being 100% biodegradable, compostable and edible, it had to be strong enough to hold the weight and the typical handling of the cans.
We launched the edible six-pack rings in all kinds of points of purchase.
It's good beer, it's good for the ocean. I love these guys.
I don't mind paying a little extra for such a big impact.
You know, big guys should learn from this small brewery.
If I can eat it, the turtles can eat it too.
See, babe, you can enjoy your beer and save the environment.
This is the first time a 100% biodegradable and edible packaging is implemented in the beer industry. This innovative technology is as resistant and efficient as the plastic six-pack rings. If most craft breweries and big beer companies would implement this technology, the manufacturing costs would drop and be very competitive compared with the current plastic solution, saving hundreds of thousands of marine lives as a result.
It's a big investment for a small brewery created by fishermen, surfers, and people that love the sea.
We want to influence the big guys and kind of inspire them to also get on board.
How does that make you feel? I think it's an awesome story because the one element was they actually used waste. So they didn't have to use virgin plastics to make the rings. Secondly, from an environmental perspective, and how many of you feel like a beer roundabout now? I think most of the people in the room. I see some hands there. Seth, thanks for that. So yeah, guys, I think the upside of all of this is that there's so much opportunity out there. But it really is just about sitting down, collaborating, working with various supply chains and coming to the right answer that will take care of our planet and hopefully the economics at the same time. Thank you.